Alright, Tom, we got a cheater. Blast him. He's dead, he's dead. You received him.
Hey there, and welcome to Explosive Enterprises, your home for shotgun and explosive and occasionally GBB or 3D printing related content. Does it shoot multiple BBs simultaneously, scare the hell out of everyone, and throw expensive shells all over the place? Then we've got you covered. Yeah, we've been doing a lot of these things, but I mean, come on, there's a reason our team's name is what it is. If you haven't figured it out yet, today we're taking a look at the Ares replica of the B&T GL-06. B&T, or Brugger and Talmott, is one of those companies that seems to have an outsized footprint in the airsoft community relative to its impact on the real-world firearms market. A substantial chunk of their catalog has been adapted into airsoft replicas, both licensed and apparently unlicensed, despite not having seen a ton of real-world service. The GL-06 is no exception here, having been adopted in relatively small numbers by a smattering of police forces around the world, as well as being licensed produced in Ukraine as the Fort 600. You may have noticed the use of police forces there versus military, and that's because the GL-06 was primarily developed as a launcher for less lethal munitions, with B&T also having developed a series of policing-focused 40mm rounds to go along with the launcher. A less lethal version of the launcher also exists, known as the LL-06, but is simply the normal GL-06 with a different colored frame, in keeping with the practice of having less lethal weapons be brightly colored to help differentiate them from lethal weapons. The GL-06 can accommodate the full range of side-folding H&K stocks, with the drop style of stock being a popular option to accommodate the face shields often worn by police officers in situations where this type of launcher would be used. As for the airsoft version, Ares makes the GL-06 in black as well as flat dark earth. Most of the replicas you will see in the United States have been imported by ASG and are fully licensed by B&T. As far as we can tell, only the black version has been imported, so if you're looking for FDE, you either need to look to an overseas retailer or bust out the Krylon. In the box, you get the launcher itself, a surprisingly decent quick-release vertical grip, and an instruction manual that you can use as kindling or something. Coming off of years of using a fairly elderly and chopped-up Craft Affleworks M79, the external quality of this launcher is pretty impressive. The barrel is made of cast aluminum, as is the forend and receiver, with the forend going through a pretty substantial portion of the frame. Speaking of the frame, it's made of plastic, and is a two-piece clamshell affair that fits around the receiver. The metal receiver gives the plastic frame a lot of rigidity, and there doesn't seem to be any noticeable flex. The UMP-like stock is made of the same plastic as the frame, though the also very UMP-like stock catch is made of aluminum. Given all the plastic and aluminum, the launcher is pretty light, clocking in at a mere 2.2 kilos or just shy of 5 pounds unloaded. With the stock folded, this thing will stay out of the way and will not be a big burden to carry around. As you might have noticed, the launcher is absolutely covered in rails, all of which are made of metal. I'm not really sure how much accessorizing you'd want to do to a grenade launcher, but if that's your thing, you have the real estate for it. The sights are a ghost ring rear sight with a simple post with protective wings for a front sight, with no elevation or windage adjustment for either. That might seem a little odd for a grenade launcher, but makes more sense if you consider that this thing is designed for close-range direct fire with less lethal munitions, and not for lobbing high explosives like a traditional 40mm launcher. And honestly, at airsoft ranges, this sighting arrangement is probably more useful than a fake ladder sight, or the complicated quadrant sight that we saw on the XM148. As for controls, it's the usual grenade launcher fare. You've got a big crossbolt safety, and obviously that does the job, but it's not really positioned for easy use, unfortunately. The trigger is very chunky and has a nice wide profile, which actually makes it pretty comfortable to use for an airsoft grenade launcher. It also provides plenty of leverage when trying to fire 40mm grenades that have been gassed with CO2, which can be a real pain on some launchers. Finally, you have the barrel release, and coming from the M79, I'd say this part is pretty genius. Using your trigger finger or middle finger, you push the release forward, which unlocks the spring-loaded barrel and allows it to pop upward. You don't have an ejector like you do on the M79, but the cutouts on the side of the barrel allow for easy removal of spent rounds. It also seems that this barrel has been toleranced such that a number of grenade brands will actually freely slide right out of it, which, if you don't mind dropping grenades on the ground, can facilitate some extremely quick reloads. As noted, the plastic frame is a clamshell, which is used to hold together 2 screws and a threaded coupler, which is a nice durable solution versus threading directly into the plastic like some manufacturers might have. Inside, we have some frankly overbuilt internal parts, and those are made of the same cast aluminum as the rest of the metal parts on the gun. I would really not be worried about the long-term durability of these things. Really, there's not a whole lot more here to discuss in terms of function. Internally, it's just your average airsoft grenade launcher. But while we have it apart, it is worth noting that the rear sight is a single piece, and while that might look like a windage adjustment screw, the whole thing is purely cosmetic. Don't go cranking on that with a screwdriver like I did. So apart from the fake windage screw, there are a couple more issues with this thing. For starters, and this one is a very big deal if you plan to fire tag-in shells or foam rockets out of it, there's actually a serious bore obstruction out of the box. The screw that holds the front of the top rail to the barrel protrudes significantly into the bore, and would definitely damage any projectiles that you tried to fire out of it, which could potentially be a serious safety hazard if you were using pyro projectiles. In a pinch, you can just back that screw out until the end of it is flush with the bore, and then Loctite it in place. For a long-term fix, a countersunk M4 by 10mm screw will do the job perfectly, without protruding into the bore. Issue number 2, there is a hole in the barrel. Unfortunately, due to the way this thing was assembled, they needed a way to insert a screwdriver into the underside of the barrel, to secure a screw that holds the top rail onto the barrel. Why exactly they needed a screw on the underside of the rail, we don't know, since the two screws on top of the rail seem to do just fine, but here we are. Now on the face of it, this might seem like a massive problem if you wanted to fire bore diameter projectiles like foam rockets, etc. out of this thing. In principle, that is true, but in practice, this hole is fairly well sealed up, since it very nearly contacts the inside wall of the frame when the launcher is closed up. When it comes to projectiles like tag-ins, this hole isn't going to be an issue, since those types of projectiles don't actually seal with the barrel of the launcher anyway. They use the length of the grenade itself as a barrel. If you were seriously concerned about sealing that hole to maximize performance, you could use a tap to thread that hole and insert some kind of threaded plug. On this launcher, just as an example, we've tapped the hole using a 10mm tap, and you could insert a 10mm threaded plug in there, using either a 10mm by 5mm grub screw, which might be a little hard to find, or by cutting the head off of a 10mm bolt. We're actually going to leave this alone since we want to be able to access those screws, and we generally use tag-in rounds in our launchers rather than foam rockets anyway. The last, and much more minor issue, if you want to remove the side rails like I did, the two side rails unfortunately act as the retention system for the barrel crosspin, so you do need something there to hold that in place, as it is just a straight pin with no detent for retention. We 3D printed these nice side panels, and we'll provide a link in the description below if you want to print them for yourself. On the whole of it, we give this thing positive marks. It's got an ergonomic, modern design, and the features that make it a practical, less lethal launcher in real life, such as the pistol grip, spring-loaded barrel, and direct-fire sights, translate quite well to an airsoft launcher. I'm not normally big into using grenade launchers with BB showers, but this thing is surprisingly effective in CQB, as you can see from the footage in the intro. It's compatible with every airsoft grenade that we have in our arsenal, including MAG, Avengers, Classic Army, Mosscart, APS, and Tag-In. Being compatible with a variety of grenades might seem like a low bar for a grenade launcher, but you'd be shocked by the number of launchers we've used that won't even fit certain brands of grenades. For a standalone launcher, it stows in a compact manner and is lightweight, without feeling flimsy or unergonomic like some compact launchers can. Looking at you, M320 stock. It is also quite reasonably priced compared to other standalone launchers, coming in a lot lower than most of the M79s, M320s, and EGLMs out there. Really, it's only being beaten by some M203 standalone setups or by the pirate pistol type launchers, which don't really fill the same niche this thing does. As mentioned, it does have its downsides. Being literally unsafe for firing footballs or pyro rounds out of the box is kind of a downer, and the hole in the barrel is an absolutely baffling design decision. But both of those are relatively easy to fix, and in the case of the barrel hole, that really only matters if you're firing foam rockets out of it. So, if you're one of the slightly strange people that actually prefers a standalone launcher, and you aren't doing a Vietnam impression, it's pretty darn tough to argue with the Ares GL-06. And by the way, if you're curious about those 3D printed grenade heads you see here, we're planning a few videos on those soon, so stay tuned for that. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments section below. Thanks for watching.